Despite outrage in Western capitals over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many countries, including some important and large states, are reluctant to openly oppose Russia or support economic sanctions against Moscow. Today, we bring you a list of those countries and the reasons why they refuse to impose sanctions on Russia. Hello guys. Welcome to Explainator. Today, we will talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and its consequences. But before we go, as always I will ask you to click like, share, subscribe to channel and so support me. Tie up, let's take off. A small number of countries have declared unconditional support for Russia since its forces entered Ukraine, including regimes in Syria, Belarus, Eritrea, North Korea, Cuba and Venezuela. But a long list of governments, including China, avoids using the term invasion and abstained from voting at the United Nations when 144 countries condemned Russia or refused to support sanctions on Russia's economy. So let's go. China. China's response to the war in Ukraine could shape the outcome of the conflict and a larger conflict between Moscow and the West. China is portrayed as neutral about the crisis in Ukraine, but state media is full of Russian propaganda and support Moscow's view that the war has been caused by NATO expansion since the end of the Cold War. For years, ties between Russia and China have steadily improved, especially since Xi Jinping came to power. The two powers share a common language in their hostility to the United States, resistance to democratization, and a rules-based world order created by the United States and its European allies after World War II. On the sidelines of the Beijing Winter Olympics, Xi and Putin said in a joint statement that the partnership between their two countries has no borders and that there are no forbidden areas of cooperation. China says it has sent humanitarian aid to Ukraine and accused the United States of exacerbating the conflict by sending weapons to the government in Kiev. As in other cases, including Iran or North Korea, China could choose to turn a blind eye to Western sanctions without explicitly defying them. The question is what China is doing behind the scenes to help Russian friends. India. Russia supplies about 60% of its weapons and equipment to the Indian military, a cornerstone of decades of friendly relations between Moscow and Delhi. Experts say this partly explains why India is so quiet about the war in Ukraine, avoiding harsh criticism from Russia and calling for a diplomatic solution. India also avoided criticizing Russia after occupying Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014. India has tried to buy more military equipment from the United States and other countries in recent years, but remains dependent on Russia. Looking at neighboring Pakistan and China as adversaries, India is increasingly concerned about deepening Moscow's ties with Beijing. Maybe that fact makes Delhi a little harsher on Russia. In a move that frustrates Washington, the Indian Central Bank is investigating a trade deal with Moscow that would use only Indian rupees and Russian rubles, bypassing Western sanctions, the Financial Times reports. India also plans to buy 3 million barrels of oil from Russia at discounted prices. Israel. Russia's attack on Ukraine has put Israel, a strong ally of the United States, in a delicate position. At first cautious in its reaction, Israel is now using harsher language in condemning the invasion of Ukraine, but has not yet joined other countries in imposing economic sanctions on Moscow. Under Israeli law, sanctions can only be imposed on a country designated as an enemy state. Israel has also not promised to send weapons to Ukraine, although Israeli-made drones could be of great help to Kiev in defending itself from Russian aggression. Citing its friendly relations with both Moscow and Kiev, Israel offered the role of mediator in the conflict. Since the start of the war, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow and had several telephone conversations with him, as well as with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Israel has also sent humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have avoided supporting the Biden administration in its efforts to isolate and punish Russia for invading Ukraine, and have avoided criticizing Moscow for its aggression. The the United Arab Emirates abstained from voting on a UN Security Council resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So far, the Gulf countries have not decided to increase oil production to control rising prices, despite demands from Washington and other Western governments. The rich Gulf monarchies see Russia as a key player in a coalition of oil producers designed to manage the global market. 3 years ago, the Saudis and other oil powers called on Russia to form an expanded group known as OPEC Plus to control production and ensure a stable, profitable oil market. The group was created to counter the impact of the U.S. shale oil boom. The Gulf Arab states do not want to jeopardize the deal with Russia over the war in Ukraine and see Russia as an important link in the oil-producing coalition. The Gulf Arab states, which host the U.S. military, have consistently supported the United States for decades, but their response to the war in Ukraine reflects a difference in interests. The assassination of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 has permanently strained U.S.-Saudi relations, and the Emirates are frustrated that the Biden administration has not imposed harsher sanctions on Iran back now this after a series of attacks on the UAE. Turkey. Under Erdogan, Turkey has had conflicting relations with Russia, with the two governments finding common ground in some areas even when they clashed elsewhere. Turkey, a NATO member, voted in favor of a UN General Assembly resolution condemning Russia for its actions in Ukraine, but did not impose sanctions on Moscow or close its airspace to Russian aircraft. In Libya and Azerbaijan, Turkey has supported groups fighting forces backed by Russia. But Erdogan and Putin have established a friendly relationship, and Turkey has bought Russian-made S-400 anti-aircraft missiles and signed energy agreements with Moscow. Turkey also expects Russia to help it maintain pressure on Kurdish groups in Syria, as Ankara fears a Kurdish state could be created on the border with Syria. Ukrainians, meanwhile, are successfully using Turkish-made drones that are very effective against Russian armored convoys. Turkey called the Russian invasion a war, allowing it to close the Bosphorus Strait, which connects to the Black Sea, to warships under the 1936 Montreux Convention. But that decision does not mean that the Russian Navy has been cut off from sailing in the Black Sea. As it tries to balance between Russia, Ukraine and NATO, Ankara has emerged as a potential mediator, along with Israel, in efforts to find a solution to the war through negotiations. Erdogan has been offering assistance in the dialogue between Moscow and Kiev, hosted Zelensky, and later traveled to the Russian city of Sochi in September to meet with Putin. South Africa. South African President Ramaphosa blamed NATO for the war in Ukraine and said he would resist calls to condemn Russia. South African political leaders have remained loyal to Moscow since the Cold War era, when the Soviet Union trained and armed anti-apartheid activists, while the United States supported the apartheid regime for years. South Africa was among about 20 African countries that refused to join the United Nations vote in condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine. Russia has nurtured ties across the continent through military cooperation agreements without attached human rights conditions, and Russian mercenaries have been linked to the conflicts in the Central African Republic and Mali. Serbia. Of course, although there are the fewest, there are some European countries that have not imposed sanctions on Russia, such as Serbia. Serbia is the only country in Europe that has not banned Russian airspace, and the airline flies from Belgrade to Moscow every day. While President Aleksandar Vučić, in Serbia is balancing, as usual, between the West and Russia, his political allies openly support Russia, but also 90% of the population. The reason is that Serbia and Russia have nurtured a brotherly relationship for centuries. Not all Hungarians and Greeks are happy about sanctions on Russia, nor is the European far right. It is similar with the more radical Trumpists in the United States, who openly support Putin. That would be all for today, guys. If you liked the video, don't forget to click like and share. If you want to watch more similar content in the future, click subscribe and support me. See you. The Explainator greets you.